Good morning, everybody. Glad to see such a strong turnout after last night's festivities. I'm Nicko van Someren. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Good Technology over in the United States, and I'm going to be presenting today along with Ken Gosselin, who's also with Good, about now you've said yes to bring your own device, what next? We're going to talk about a bunch of issues that come up when we start to allow bring your own device into enterprises and the challenges that we face when we're trying to ensure that we maintain control of our enterprise data when we're allowing people to use their own devices. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the changing mobility market. We've seen some fairly seismic shifts in the mobility marketplace over the last few years, and talk about the way that your staff in your enterprises want to use these mobile devices to make them productive while they're out on the road. And talk about the security challenges that we face when we try to mobilize enterprise data and let people use data that we've historically kept inside the enterprise when they're out and about and using mobile devices, especially when they're using their own mobile devices. We're going to talk about the sorts of custom applications people are starting to build when they want to have richer interaction with that enterprise data. And we're going to talk about the ways to approach transforming your business in order to make the most of mobility. So, BlackBerries, they used to be the dominant force in the world of mobility, especially for the enterprise, but the world is changing. And, we're moving away from corporate issued devices to a variety of personally owned devices. Bring your own devices in corporate uses. And the users we find, when we survey a lot of end users, and it's all about collaboration. It's all about trying to be productive. We're not taking these mobile devices just for fun. Some people want to play Angry Birds, but in the enterprise, we're trying to make people productive while they're mobile. And so, historically we used our BlackBerries to do email, to do calendar, to do, look up address book entries, but we want to do document editing. We want to do file sharing and syncing. We want to do so much more with these very powerful mobile devices, and it's all about productivity. And on the other hand, those might be the drivers for the user, but IT has a different set of requirements. IT has obligations to keep enterprise data confidential and to have compliance reporting to ensure that not only are they meeting the security goals, but they can demonstrate that they've met those security goals. They want manageability, not just of the devices, but of the data that is being used by those devices. And so there's a bit of a tension there. There's a gap between the devices that people are using and the problems faced by IT. But bring your own device, the movement to move away from those enterprise-owned devices and to a world where we bring our own devices into the company is already very well established. We're seeing great swaths of the enterprise space already making use of bringing your own device. We survey a lot of users, and a big chunk of financial services are already supporting that, despite their heavy regulation. Healthcare, government sector, we're seeing all of these areas where bring your own device is already penetrating into the business, or is soon to be supported. And it doesn't really matter what size of company. Across our surveys, we find that the penetration of bring your own device spans all business sizes as well as all business sectors. So the trends that we're seeing are, people are trying to use their existing personal mobile devices to access enterprise data even when their companies are not necessarily officially supporting it. So we talk to customers who say, well, you know, my employees don't have a good way to access their corporate email on their Android device or their iPhone, so they just forward it to their Gmail account. And from an IT point of view, this is, you know, the worst thing that could possibly happen, because now it's completely outside your control. You know, they're routinely using their personal devices for work uses, but there's no control over the data, and they're doing this even when they're explicitly told not to. There's a huge amount of people violating policy by making use of their personal devices, routinely disregarding the security standards set by IT because they want to be productive, because they want to get their job done. And they don't want to have to carry two devices. And now that pretty much everybody has their own personal, powerful mobile device, they don't want to be given a second device and told, now you've got to carry two devices if you want to do any work. They want to be able to use one device for both purposes. So, bring your own device is occurring in enterprises, whether you like it or not. And as IT security and risk people, we have to say, okay, it's going to happen. Either I can, you know, instigate incredibly draconian measures against the vast majority of my staff, or I can embrace it. And if I embrace it, you know, how am I going to do this? What do I need to do to make sure that it's secure? So, you know, we've got a bunch of challenges to face when we start to embrace bring your own device. You know, there's all of the malicious applications that are out there, particularly in the Android space. We're seeing, you know, very, very large levels of malware on the Android app stores, because the open market in the Android space is very much of a, you know, shoot first, ask questions later. The apps go up, and if somebody complains, they'll take them down. Apple a little less so in terms of the malware, because of course Apple have a curated app store. But then we've got devices that are being compromised, jailbroken in order to run extra applications or to add functionality, and that often circumvents a lot of the device management technology that was built into the operating system. We've got a very, very diverse set of operating systems. You know, back in the day when everybody used BlackBerries for their enterprise email, you know, we had one platform to support. In a BYOD world, you know, we've got iOS and Android, and soon we'll probably have some more Windows Mobile. It looks like Windows Mobile 8 might be, you know, bringing that more into the enterprise. And across the Android space, the operating system set is very fragmented. So we have this huge diversity of operating systems that we have to, at some level, support whether we like it or not, because we no longer have the choice as IT people as to what gets run. And so there's potential for operating system version drift, and you know, various different versions having different vulnerabilities. And we're also seeing people saying, well, I'll just use the native email and I'll stick my Active Directory credentials into the native email client, and that leads to potential exposure of the credentials that we should be reserving for access into enterprise resources being put onto and stored on personal mobile devices. Then there's a whole host of other problems that we face, which are to do with the leakage of information from these devices, because these devices are designed to be very promiscuous with their sharing of information. It's very easy to move data around between applications, and these devices tend to do very convenient things for the end user, like sync with iCloud, or load the contents of your address book on your phone, which is now your Exchange address book, up onto your Facebook page. And so that sort of synchronization capability opens up a whole host of ways that data can leak out of these devices. And the cut and copy and paste functionality between applications, the ability to move data from one app to another, is a potential source of exposure for enterprise data that we'd like to keep more secure. So, you know, we're here we are at a Gartner conference, so I had to include the obligatory Gartner quote. I'm very glad to see that Gartner are totally in tune with this. The managing the device is not enough. Our problem here is one of data management, not device management. This is, if we're going to have a multi-use device, then it's not sufficient to manage the whole device. We've actually got to manage the set of information that we're trying to protect as an IT organization, rather than trying to manage just the device as a whole. And so we've got to put the controls as close to the data as possible. And that means putting the controls into the applications that we're using, rather than putting them around the whole device. And so, when we look at, people are trying to apply classic mobile device management that we've been using for corporate issued devices to bring your own device. And, the user comes back and says, so you want me to switch iCloud off? I like iCloud. We have corporate policies about 8-character alphanumeric plus punctuation passwords for accessing corporate data. So now I have to have an 8-character alphanumeric plus punctuation password to make a phone call, and an 8-character alphanumeric plus punctuation password to check Facebook, and an 8-character alphanumeric plus punctuation password to play Angry Birds. It starts to get pretty tiring pretty quickly. So that sort of corporate policy applied to a personal device is not only a blunt tool, but it's just the wrong tool for the job in hand. And we need to be able to apply these sorts of policies at a much finer grained level, and that way we can protect the enterprise data rather than just protecting the devices. And now I think it's important to note that we're seeing these explosions in the devices coming into enterprise. You see these huge numbers for the volumes of devices that are being shipped. But it's also important to note that there's huge volumes of applications that are being built for these devices. And as far as the user is concerned, it's all about the apps. And this is what makes these smartphone technologies so powerful. An iOS device is cute, but an iOS device with a whole host of applications on it is powerful. And we've got close to 750,000 applications on both iOS and Android now, and that sort of diversity of ecosystem for the applications that we might want to run, is leading users to think of these devices as the go-to tool for everything that they do. And we've got to be able to cope with that as the go-to tool for everything they do in the enterprise, as well as in the personal life. I think it's important to understand that, I love this Dilbert cartoon, my only hope for productivity is to bring my own device into the enterprise. And so, no, you can't do that. The fact is, it's happening. People are bringing their devices into the enterprise, and they're also bringing their own applications into the enterprise. And this is where we start to see a whole host of new risks, because we're seeing people saying, well, Dropbox, it's a really handy way for me to get information from one place to another, so I'm going to take next quarter sales projections and I'm going to stick them on Dropbox. And is that compliant with your IT security policies? Probably not. So that bring your own application mentality is starting to have an impact on the way that information is flowing in and out of enterprises. And when we survey the companies, 90% of companies are already saying either we support bring your own device or we're going to support bring your own device in the next 12 months. And so, we've got to work with them to understand how these consumer applications are going to get applied to the business world. Because otherwise people are going to start using applications which have not been designed with enterprise security in mind. And they're going to be trying to apply those to enterprise-grade tasks. And so when we talk to customers about the applications that they want to mobilize, there's a whole slew of sets of applications that everybody is wanting to mobilize their activities. These are the top list of applications areas that people planned to mobilize in 2012. This is slightly an old survey. I guess we'll find out in a few weeks' time how accurate this was. Down there at the bottom, we've got email and calendar and contacts, which is something that people have already been doing for a while in the mobile space. But ERP, CRM, business intelligence, all of these areas where we're accessing important corporate data, and we want to mobilize the access to this important corporate data. And so we're working with a number of people across these spaces, as well as building our own application to address these problems. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that. So I think the key thing to understand when we try to mobilize enterprise data onto bring your own devices is that mobile devices these days, the operating systems in them are leaky. And this is not a bug, this is a feature. They are leaky by design. Consumer-grade operating systems by people like Apple and Google and Microsoft are very, very good at what they do. And what they do is satisfy the needs of consumers. And mobile operating systems are not targeted at businesses. They are leaky by design because customers want to move data from one application to another. They want to be able to synchronize data from one device to another. They want to be able to share data from one user to another. And this is absolutely great if you're a consumer and you want to do all of these things. And it's absolutely terrible if you're the IT risk person trying to roll out a bring your own device policy. Because these devices, these operating systems are leaky by design. And the sorts of controls that we would have to overlay into the operating system to undo this without compromising the functionality to the user when the user actually wants to use it, it would be phenomenally cumbersome to fix this problem through device management alone. So we need another approach because these consumer-focused devices are not implementing the sorts of controls we need. Users are bringing them into the enterprise with or without IT's knowledge. They're applying apps that are not designed to meet IT's needs. And they're putting enterprise data onto these consumer devices with consumer apps, and it's leaking back out again. And when we try to start building applications that satisfy these needs, there's actually a whole host of problems that we have to face. How do we encrypt the application data both at the device and over the air? How do we deal with the network firewall traversal? A lot of people don't realize that not only are your enterprise servers behind a firewall, but all of those mobile devices are also behind a firewall. All of the carriers put carrier-grade NAT firewalls in front of all of their mobile devices because there aren't enough IP addresses in the world to satisfy all of the mobile devices in the world. So we've got two layers of firewall. We have to deal with firewall traversal in order to do this. We've got to protect data on applications even when the devices themselves have been compromised. And we're looking at the Android App Store, and there are a whole host of applications that look benign but are in fact malware of various sorts, ranging from things that just send text messages to premium rate numbers right through to things that exfiltrate data. And in fact, we're also seeing malware which is doing port scanning. So anybody who thought that the solution to getting mobile devices into their enterprise was to VPN it back into through a secure tunnel, now that there are port scanning malware on Android, we've actually got a whole host of problems if you try and VPN that back into the enterprise. So, and we've got to do all of this in a way that is actually going to protect the privacy of the user and protect the personal rights of the user, because it's not your data and it's not your device for the bulk of the data that's on there. And if I do a whole device wipe to clear out any enterprise data when a user leaves the company, then you're going to wipe out all of their personal data at the same time. And There's already been cases coming up in Europe where there's some quite strong data protection laws and privacy laws suggesting that application blacklisting is not an acceptable policy for bring your own device because it involves IT prying into the list of personal applications that I happen to use. And if some of those may be considered unsavory, that's none of the employer's darn business. So, we've got a whole bunch of problems to address when we're trying to build applications that satisfy these often conflicting security needs. But without this, we've got these leaks. If we open a native email, iOS has very good native encryption. It has good transport encryption, it has good data at rest encryption. But if I can open an email and long press and choose open in Dropbox, then I've just exfiltrated data from that strongly encrypted device. And similarly, if I've got instant messaging going on between users, not only can I just easily cut and paste that and send it straight back out through my personal mail account, but if I'm in a regulated industry, I may actually have a requirement for all of that instant messaging to go through a corporate server so that it can go through logging, and I can't do that with the standard instant messaging tools. So, and the native device encryption, native device encryption on iOS is actually very strong, except that, users are actually really bad at choosing pins, and we're not going to get away with forcing them to have a hugely complicated password because otherwise they'll have to use it for Facebook and Angry Birds and making phone calls. And even though there's reasonably strong native encryption, if you have a 4-digit numeric PIN, it can be cracked in about 9 minutes on average. In fact, if you're smart about it, you can do it a lot quicker than that. The worst case is about 18 minutes. So, it's all the strong encryption in the world, certainly not going to help if they fail to set a password altogether. So unless we're going to foist industrial strength password policies onto consumer uses, we run into some big problems there. So now I'm going to talk a bit about why we might want to build custom apps to handle enterprise-grade data. There's been this huge growth in the devices out there, both phones and tablets, and you can see from the chart, we're not only are we seeing 2.5-fold growth in the total number of devices, but the total number of tablets is growing much faster than that. The latest iPad, it looks like there are some people in this audience who are over 40. Who here has ever used an IBM 370 or run a system on an IBM 370? The latest iPad that Apple launched has more CPU power than the fastest IBM 370s that IBM ever sold. So these are fairly powerful devices that we now have at our fingertips. And the ability to do work on these tablets is only bounded by our imagination and our ability to go and rate the software to do what we want. We now have a large enough screen to see a reasonable amount of data. We have a powerful enough processor to do anything we could conceivably want. We've got many gigabytes of storage locally and very fast network connectivity. So these are very powerful tools. And naturally, we want to access our enterprise data on them and do useful stuff with them. And doing this has the power to change the way that we do businesses. USAA, a big insurance company in the United States, expected to receive 22 million contacts through their mobile system in the first year, in year 3, and they actually got 120 million. First Data, who are a credit card company, built an iPad application specifically for onboarding of new customers, and they found that it cut the time to do the job by 60%. So they could onboard 2.5 times as many people with the same level of staffing. So it's changed the way they did their business. Salesforce.com. The majority of the transaction volume on Salesforce.com these days comes through their mobile clients. And Sabre, the travel company, the ticketing company, It got 50,000 seat picks in the first month and 5 million seat picks through their mobile portal in month 4. So, I mean, it's really transforming the way that people are doing business by having access to these powerful mobile technologies. And with the level of bring your own device rising so rapidly, we're seeing the interest in enterprise applications growing even more rapidly, because the rise of the tablet is really changing the landscape for enterprise application and demanding that we have the ability to put more enterprise data more securely in a way that we can interact with it. And it's no longer sufficient to say my mobility strategy is to support email and calendar and address book. That's not a sufficient mobility strategy. We've got to mobilize the applications that people want to use in order to interact with this data if we're going to have a successful mobile strategy. So let's take a look at what enterprises are actually doing. We're seeing a level of grades. There are lots and lots of businesses experimenting in mobility. There are a number of them who are just funding various line of business application development to try out certain things. Often these are actually unfunded projects. People just, some smart kid decides that he's got an iOS developer kit and he's going to write a little application to access that enterprise data. We see that over and over again. A lot of that, nearly a fifth of the companies that we speak to are actually doing cross-division, broader-based investigation and exploration into, in-depth, how are we going to handle mobility. But we're really at the start of the curve here. Only a small sliver of the companies we speak to are actually really maturing their mobility strategies and going full out to build stuff. But it's clear that that's going to have to change because this is really changing the way that people are doing business. And when we look at the way that this builds out, there's a lot of companies that are doing business to consumer. Most of the retail companies that you speak to are starting to build their own applications for getting the message out there. It's up there with social on their list of priorities. But there's about 10% of the app development going on which is focusing on the app development for inside the enterprise, for business to employee and for business to business. And we're seeing device security was the starting point in the last couple of years, but app security is now where this is going. And as we roll this out, as we grow the number of applications that we start to deploy into enterprises, we start to have to think about, well, how are we going to deal with the app lifecycle? How are we going to make sure that of my 10,000 employees, only 500 need this application? We don't want to clutter everybody else's system up with that application. So the whole app lifecycle, app store, app management set of problems start to become something we have to think about as we roll out our bring your own device strategy in enterprise. And I think that the app development and app management are going to be the areas that are going to be of most interest as we move forwards in the mobile space in enterprises. And this is borne out by these numbers that we see about, there better be an app for that. There's the catchphrase, there's an app for that. But these days, end users expect there to be an app to do access to the CRM system, or access to the purchasing system, or access to the business intelligence system. And users' expectations are driving a lot of companies to really push hard to roll out new application development in the mobile space. So I'm going to hand over now to Ken Gosselin, who is in charge of our partner relations, and he's going to talk about some of the work that his team and various of our partners are doing in terms of approaches to handling mobility transformation.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicko. my name is Ken Gosselin. I'm in charge of our partner alliances for good, and I'd like to take you through a walk through some of the interesting lessons learned and best practices through many of our global systems integrators. So first of all, I want to take a poll because we've been working globally with a plethora of our clients, and when we come in to speak to clients, we'll go, well, where do you fit on your maturity curve, and what have you thought about doing in mobility? So sometimes we ask, you know, what are you doing? They go, yeah, we do mobility, we do MDM. We have MDM, we're covered, right? So if you look, I want to get kind of a poll by raise of hands. So who is at the MDM level right now? Who has a BYOD strategy in place and who has MDM in place currently? Can we get a raise of hands? Okay, there's some there. And then at another level, who has instituted mobile secure messaging, whether it be with BlackBerry, with Good for Enterprise, who has mobile secure messaging for email and calendaring and whatnot. Okay, so there's a few there as well. And then finally, as you progress into the application arena, who's actually instituted an application strategy, whether it be containerization or app wrapping of your either horizontal or vertical-based applications within your companies. Who's at the app level? Okay, so hardly anybody's there. There's just a couple, right? So what we wanted to show you and explain to you, when you do and look at your mobile strategy, it's more than just MDM, it's more than secure messaging, it's more than just apps. You have to look at a holistic array of dimensions from mobile application development and management, and the security and the governance that you have to put in place from a policy strategy as well. Some of the systems integrators that we work with, they have assessment methodologies because mobility has matured from being pure technology to an entire ecosystem that a company actually employs within their corporate strategy. So everything from looking at your assessment of strategic initiatives, getting what pilots and POCs need to be rolled out, and a final plan for your first increment, right? You're not going to do everything at once, but an incremental fashion usually works good. And security considerations. Look at this chart now. This is where you guys should actually measure where you currently fit, right? So look at that from open, aware, managed, and lockdown. You guys should take a litmus test for where you fit on that. Many companies are open because they're just starting their mobility journey. Others have some increments employed to get further locked down. And then finally, when you are locked down, what does lockdown mean? And do you have everything locked down from your data, the proper policies in place, and access to data within your company, and segregation of personal versus corporate liable information? Now, if you look at this chart, these are all the dimensions that one must consider when employing your corporate strategy. Everything from the technology on one side to the implementation of policy and procedure within your organization. So these are all very important. And then finally, from a installation of technology bundled with your actual strategy, where do you fit on this curve? We took a short poll at the beginning. Many are currently at device management, and as you increase on the value curve for getting business productivity and enhancement and return on investment back for instituting mobile, where do you actually fit, and how can we help you get there? So we'd like to really have you take a hard look at this, see where you fit, and when you're thinking your mobile strategy, it's not just MDM, it's not just email, it's not just app, it is an entire strategy that one must employ. Nicko?
So I think that, we've said this several times during the course of the presentation. Ultimately, when you take a step back, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? The problem that you're trying to solve is one of data management, not device management. Device management has in the past been a useful means to an end when we had corporate liable devices. But in a BYOD world, the problem that we're trying to solve is one of data management. And we've got to have a set of tools in hand that solve the data management problem. Device management may be a piece of that solution, but it's certainly not a complete solution for the problem. So, we're going to be securing the data in the application. And so we've built a suite of tools for enabling collaboration. At Good, we've built messaging, calendar, address book, file sharing, instant messaging, and intranet web browsing. The sort of very horizontal applications that everybody's going to need. But if you want to secure all the enterprise data, you've got to have a much richer set of applications. So we've created a framework based on the security platform that we have underpinning all of our applications, which makes it very straightforward for enterprise app developers to rapidly solve all of those problems about data at rest, encryption, data in movement, data in flight encryption, firewall traversal, policy management, policy enforcement, policy reporting and compliance. All of those sets of functionalities that we need to have in order to secure the data. We've created a framework called Good Dynamics, which makes it very easy for app developers, whether they're ISVs or whether they're in-house developers, to build applications which are going to work with your policies and your requirements for data protection. It's no good if an ISV builds a tool which has some security capability in it, and that security capability doesn't comply with your policy. So you need a framework which makes it possible for ISVs and in-house developers to put in support for whatever policy is appropriate for whichever constituency you're deploying this to. So having a framework that lets IT and IT risks set a policy that is consistent across all of those different apps that you're deploying and can enforce it and can report on it. It's a very powerful tool. And we're working with a whole host of app developers to have this baked deeply into their applications. We also have technology which allows us, in the application management space, to overlay these sorts of security policies into existing applications for the cases where the app developer doesn't want to bake them deeply into the application. Now, app wrapping, as that's called, the ability to put extra layers of security onto existing applications, is a powerful tool, but often gives you a relatively superficial level of security, appropriate for certain types of tasks, but it doesn't give you the nuanced policies that are aware of the semantics of the data that you can get by baking that sort of framework deep into your application. But we support both approaches because it's important to allow you access to the widest range of applications possible. So we've worked with a bunch of app developers, and increasingly we have several hundred app developers working on Good Dynamics-enabled applications. We also have the ability to distribute applications through the app wrapping technology to put that Good Dynamics support into the other applications that you might have brought in from elsewhere. And if you'd like a demonstration of this, we have people at booth D12 who will be able to give you a demo of this and show you the power of these tools. And the power of being able to protect the data, not the device. Now, it may be useful to protect the device in some circumstances. It may be useful to understand what the security posture of the device is without perhaps actually impacting it. Especially in a BYOD world, being able to know what it is, even if you don't change it, is a very useful thing. But ultimately, the problem we're trying to solve is one of data protection and compliance. And I think that that's the approach we have to take as we roll out to a much broader selection of apps handling enterprise data on personal devices. So I'm going to leave it there, and if you have any questions, I have 5 minutes, 20 seconds left in my slot, apparently. So I can take any questions that you have now, and if you'd like a demonstration, we're at booth D12, and we can show you some of this in action and answer more detailed questions there. Thank you. Any questions? Either I answered everything or it was really daunting. Okay, well, thank you very much.